afternoon. The board workshop for March 23rd, 2021 is in session. Roll call.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Present.
And Mr. Susan?
Present.
Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Today, Cindy Lisinski, our Chief Financial Officer, will be providing us with updates on capital outlay and enrollment projections. I will turn it over to her at this time.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Mullins. Last month, we went through the budget workshop on operating funds, and then this workshop is going to talk about the capital budget and take a look at how we're going to focus on how we'll spend capital funding on projects for next year. And then, as always, we stand fast by our district priorities and guidelines. So this slide, it's very interesting. I find it very interesting. If you take a flashback back to 2008, you'll remember the free fall of the economy due to the collapse of the housing market. This was due to, the way the mortgages were structured and banks were lending. In the 3 years following, you can see the 3 years of double-digit declines in our housing property values. And now you fast forward to 2020, we find ourselves in a really different situation. It's hard to believe a year ago the U.S. economy came to a sudden stop when COVID-19 became a pandemic. The pandemic drove interest rates to historic lows, and families to suburbs looking for space and affordable homes. We are in a buyer's market. Home values and new construction are on the rise. Experts expect this trend to continue into the next year, if not further. But there is no expectation of a lag of large declines in the next couple of years.
Ms. Lisinski, can I interject? I think board members are aware of this, but just as a reminder, and for the viewing public, this shows a very encouraging real estate value recovery from those years of double. 3 years of double-digit percentage declines. But the growth we see in revenue is from growth of new homes in Brevard, not the recovery of the property values of existing homes in those years of 2012, 13, 14, and so on. Had we not experienced those declines with the growth we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 years, property value taxes revenue would be, well, they'd exceed what you see on the chart there today and probably for the last 3 or 4 years. So I hear often when I'm out talking to the public, my property tax continues to go up, so you've had to have recovered from the recession. Well, revenue has gone up, but it's not as the result of the property values. And well, how can that be? Well, Save Our Homes only permits no more than 3% of a real estate value increase every year. But if you look at those 3 years of, there was 35% reduction in property values and revenue, so that hasn't recovered for those homes that existed back then, if that makes sense. So absolutely a much more favorable picture than what we experienced as a county and a state 10, 11 years ago. But it doesn't represent the revenue that would be in place had the recession not hit Brevard, what I would suggest, even more harshly than many other parts of the state and across the country. So appreciate the opportunity just to interject that.
Okay, great, thank you. Our 2020-21 assessed property values were certified by the property appraiser on July 1st, 2020 at $48.7 billion, and the most updated state projection for next year is $50.5 billion, and we'll receive a revised estimate from the property appraiser June 1st and a certified taxable values July 1st. Is there any more questions on this one? So this slide provides an estimate of our major sources of current year capital revenues, beginning with local capital improvement tax levy, or LCI. Our 2021 school taxable property value, like we said in the last slide, was $48.7 billion. As you saw, as you know, we levy our capital revenue at 1.5 mils, and we collect at 96% collection rate, and that translates into $70.8 million that we have this year in LCI. But if you recall from last year, we transferred, or we are transferring $35.3 million for debt service, 10.3 for maintenance, and about $5 million for property taxes. So that brings us down. That brought us down to about $18 million this year that we allocated projects last year. The sales surtax revenue, $45.4 million, and you can see that it's part of it. That is the remainder of the 2014 program, and that was ended in December. And then the first 6 months of the new sales tax renewal of 20, and we're estimating that we'll receive $21.7 million. Charter schools will now receive 10% of that, and that's new in the Florida statute. And then you can see these pictures of these buses. It's important that we continue to renew our buses, refresh them, get the fleet down to the right size, because old buses are really expensive to maintain, and they become unsafe as well. Okay, so this next slide continues to depict major sources of capital revenue. We estimate $14.2 million of collections and impact fees. Impact fees are a one-time fee imposed on all new residential and commercial construction by local governments to defray the cost of growth, impact on vital services such as schools, parks, roads, fire service. The rationale behind impact fees is new construction means new residents. New residents increase the burden on local services like schools. To pay for that impact, governments impose impact fees. We can use impact fees to build additional capacity to accommodate student growth. Additionally, if you recall from Sue Hand's brief in December, Brevard County has a north and a south impact fee benefit district, and the impact fees must benefit the district in which they're collected. And then PICO, Public Education Capital Outlay, revenues are allocated by the state from proceeds from gross receipts on tax on utilities and landlines aren't getting as much as they used to. This is the third year that the state directed funding to the charters and sidestepped the districts. The charters are receiving $4 million this year, and that's the way for the state to ensure that the charter schools get some capital funding. And then the last one is the capital outlay and debt service revenues, and they're derived from proceeds from state auto license fees. and are constitutionally earmarked for educational capital improvement needs. This allocation is very restrictive, and it is provided by the Office of Educational Facilities. The requirement of these projects must be listed on a project priority list that is developed from the Educational Plant Survey, and we're currently restricted to HVAC and roofing until we file a new project priority list. And then also, we use this funding towards the control chiller plant. Okay. So moving to next year's planning, we convened the committees. The committee convened, and it was mainly Russell, Sue, Robin Novelli, myself, Susan Denyer, and Wendy Knipple. And we looked at how much money we had. I believe it was $19.6 million. And we had $29 million of requests. So we sat down and we looked at the considerations: health, safety, security, making sure a supportive 21st century learning environment, bus fleet management, upgrading existing facilities and equipment, and affordability. So I love this picture of these. This is the same room, my understanding is, but you can see that the schools had all these standalone PCs and all the room that it's taking. And then down here is where Russell plans on going, is everyone has their own laptop. So, you know, if something were to happen, everyone can kind of bug out with their laptop, and it just makes sense, because before, when we shut down, no one could take the laptop home because they only had these computers, and you can see how much room they're taking. So this is something that I really think is that we need to evolve to. And in order to support 21st century learning, we have to evolve with the speed of relevance. As you go through the list, you'll see an eye towards innovation, which I really appreciate, that our folks are just thinking about how we can do things better. And, you know, for example, to be innovative doesn't mean you have to go buy the most shiny thing, the new shiny thing. The innovative is just trying to get something done in a different way. And so an example would be the goats that Sue used for lawns. And then now she's, you know, doing a pilot with robotic lawnmowers. So I think that's pretty awesome. And that we're just continuing down that road. But again, it has to be affordable as well. Okay, so this slide is the FY22 estimated funding that we're going to have, and you can see that the allowable budget revenue at 96% collection was $72.6 million. And then again, the debt service, this time it's a little bit higher than last year. It's $37.7 million. And we still plan on transferring maintenance funds to the operating fund, $10.3 million, and property insurance at $5 million. It's under negotiation right now, and we'll see if that number stays. So the bottom line is we have an estimated remaining LCI funding for projects of $19.6 million. And then the quote on the bottom is, you know, you go through so many studies, and Sue has talked about this many times, is facility quality is really an important predictor of student learning and teacher retention. So I put a large list on, everyone should have, of all the requests, and then you can see the project item number and the name on the left, who submitted it, the requested amount, what the committee proposed, and comments on the very end. And, you know, the first two are funding that, you know, the schools need to replace furniture and desks and equipment, those kind of things. So those are things that we refresh every year, or allow the leading and learning to, you know, create some kind of refresh plan so that they can make the schools have, nicer equipment and those kind of things. The next is procurement. There's a lot of equipment that we use till the life expectancy and past, and a lot of these pieces of equipment are unsafe, they're not usable, and we need them. So we funded those. New school buses, purchase of 30 was the request. We reduced it to 25. The goal is to get the fleet down so no buses older than 10 years, I believe. And then that way they can stay on warranty and they don't cost as much to maintain. It only makes sense. And then you can go down, and transportation is the same way. And actually they have some, when you talk about innovation, they have some things on here that are innovative as well, that they're trying to be more efficient and saving funding. The example is that heavy duty tire changer. They bought one last year and it's working, and they're doing, they don't have to contract it out any longer. And then you'll also see in the comments the potential ESSER eligible. That is something that we're taking a look at. If we're able to fund that with ESSER 2, still too early to tell. But if we do, then that would free up $4 million to continue to go down this list and fund some things that we didn't fund. Then you'll also see not eligible when a project did not meet the guidelines for capital funding. And then the next slide, again, you'll see the question of eligibility. We're still taking a look at that. We don't believe Microsoft Enterprise Agreement would be a capital cost, but there's a possibility that maybe part of it would be. And again, we're looking at these others. And then we go into the lawn maintenance and the operations maintenance. And those lawnmowers are getting pretty old as well. And then finally, Sue and Russell are back there, and they're the experts on their projects if you have any questions. And what we are asking is for you to review this list, make any comments, any suggestions, and we can come back the next workshop and present that to you if need be.
Thank you, Ms. Lisinski. Board members have questions? Campbell?
Real quick. And Ms. Han, Ms. Lisinski or Ms. Han, whoever would be the best answer. Last year when we had this, our workshops regarding the capital outlay budget, we had a lot of discussion about air conditioning in our middle school locker rooms. And I know that we've done some work on that, but I noticed it's not anywhere on here. So can you kind of give us an update as to where that landed?
Yes, ma'am. The prior year's capital budget included money for design of the middle school locker rooms, and we went ahead and did that work. And based on where we are now, I was able to fund that through our existing capital that was allocated last year. So you'll see in this request there's $6.1 million for facilities capital renewal. That I think it was 6.2 or 3 last year. That money, some of that was still available this year. We didn't have as many emergencies as we had in prior years, mostly due to our sales surtax investment, I believe. And so I felt comfortable investing about $1.3 million in that, and that was on the board agenda in March, early March, to approve the construction contracts for the 7 middle schools. So that work will be underway shortly.
That is awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. McDougall?
Ms. Hahn, I have a question about MILA, and I see it's a multi-year. I mean, you and I have talked about MILA and some of the conditions of the school there, which is unique. Is this 300,000 that you wanted? We got 150. So how long is this going to be dragged out? I guess I want to ask.
Ms. McDougall, I'm not sure I can specifically answer that question yet, because we're not sure what the best approach is. We looked, starting with Building 9, that's kind of where we were focusing, and we're looking at whether or not Building a new classroom addition is a more cost-effective approach than a complete renovation of Building 9. And so that 150,000 will get us started down that track, and I anticipate we'll move from analysis to design of something, one of those two options. And we'll probably pull from the capital allocation that goes to facility renewal to continue that work. But we see that as a project that we need to move on, and I'd like to at least get started, and then we'll have a better feel for what that's actually going to entail.
I just want to make sure, Building 9, is that the one with the pool?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Let me explain to my fellow board members. Mila has a significant ESE population, and so this is a therapeutic pool that, if you walk in there right now, it's very, best word I can use is interesting. But I'm glad that Sue and her team is looking at it.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Ms. Jenkins, looked like you might have had a question.
Yeah. Mr. Cheatham, my questions are for number 11 and 12 on this list for the teacher device refreshment project and the student device refreshment project. I know it uses the word refreshment, but I'm just curious here. I have a two-part question. Is this to help get towards that goal of one-to-one in our middle schools and our pre-K and kindergarten, or is this just overall across grade levels to refresh? And then my other question is, there's some pretty significant cuts to those, not cuts, I shouldn't use that word, but the proposals as opposed to the requested amounts. And it says potential ESSER available. Is that potential ESSER available comment filling the void between the requested and the proposed, or is that just saying that the proposed could potentially be coming from ESSER?
A little bit of both. So refreshment, basically that means just refreshing those old devices that are getting close to 12, 13 years old. That's typically what we use capital for. As you see, we have a request. That's the request we feel if we get that amount each year, that will kind of keep us even on the refreshment. As you can see, we typically don't get that request, so we continue to fall a little bit behind. On the ESSER aspect of it, there's two parts. Some of it is refreshment, some of it is getting additional devices that we needed during the response to the pandemic. So we're kind of meeting two goals with the ESSER funds. I work very closely with Dr. Sullivan. I see she stepped in as well. But we've been working very closely trying to just find the right mix of refreshment versus getting new devices, as we have some schools that just didn't have a lot of laptops or mobile devices. So we had to work a little bit harder with those schools than the ones that had mobile devices, but they were just really old. The difference between the teacher and student devices, typically when we have funds, we go after the student devices. Over the last couple of years, we've had to focus on teacher devices. They were just getting too old.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I jump in for a second? Since Russell's already on, let me, you had asked about the status of the middle school one-to-one. I believe that's already committed from prior funds. That's not in anticipation of 22. Is that correct, Mr. Cheatham?
Correct. We've moved forward with the middle school one-to-one project. In late April, there'll be a technology workshop similar to this, and we'll talk to you about the overall plan a lot more.
So just for the board's benefit, Mr. Cheatham is updating the technology plan for the district. And as he and I have worked and talked through this, he's going to be presenting to the board our intention, our goal to move to one-to-one as a district over a span of time based on relatively consistent funding through the capital budget and in the operating budget that he normally has, kind of to the exception of ESSER funding, because we know that's consistent and dependable. We know we have the goal to become one-to-one. ESSER, as it becomes available and we can look to divert or commit dollars to technology, may help us accelerate that plan. Am I getting that right, Mr. Cheatham? But the details, you know, we just got ESSER number 2, if you will, and it's not called ESSER anymore. It's CRISA? It's still ESSER, too. Okay. Just got that last week, late last week, and so Dr. Sullivan, like Mr. Cheatham said, is working with them and already looking at some additional allocation for technology after we meet some of our other priorities of, you know, student learning and those types of things. So we'll likely have more detailed information for the board as Dr. Sullivan works through the ESSER proposal, and then as we approach the April technology plan workshop in late April. So, but we definitely have the goal, the continued goal to move to one-to-one across the district.
Thank you, Dr. Mullen. Mr. Susan, comments or questions? Really? Okay. I do have just a couple, Ms. Lisinski, and I don't feel free to field them out. I'll direct them your way, and you can kick them to whoever's best to respond.
Okay.
But first, one, just on our 1.5 mils on the LCI, for our public to understand what takes place there with those dollars, the state sets that 1.5, correct?
Correct.
And is that the same for all districts throughout the state, all school districts?
Yes.
And has it always been 1.5?
I believe it used to be 2.
So they adjusted us from 1.5 to 2 at some point in
From
history,
2 to
right?
1.5.
Or from 2 to 1.5, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Back, I want to say 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. Do they give us an option to collect more in LCI than that? Can we, like oftentimes when I'm out and I'm talking to people in the public, they will say to us, but you have the choice to raise that LCI. That's up to you as a board. You could do that. Can you address that?
Yeah, I don't believe so. I'm looking at Wendy or Karen.
I haven't checked the statute in quite a while, but originally we went from 2 to 1.75 mils, and then we went from 1.75 mils down to 1.5, and we have the availability to move that 0.25, is my understanding. We can take it away from the operating fund and levy it for the capital funds, but that means you will cost the operating fund the 0.25 plus any compression that would have gone along with it. So you don't just gain the same amount in capital, you actually cost the operating fund more than you would gain in the capital project fund. That's my understanding of how it used to be. I'm not aware that it's changed.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Strickland. I appreciate that explanation for our public. And then the other, I guess, kind of generalized question is, we start the presentation talking about the importance of facilities to student experience. And I know the work that you all put into coming up with these priorities is very much student-centered. But if the public was looking at this list, there are lots of things that I think they may have difficulty understanding how some of these things impact student experience. So for their understanding and the board members' understanding as well, just to be able to discuss it, can you address some of those things that seem like they are very far away from student experience, but we know being in the district that they do in fact have an impact?
I guess, the forklift for the mailroom, we have to operate. And so the forklift that they have now is unsafe, and you have to refresh equipment. You need to make sure that we can be efficient. And so, the back support is very important. The schools are the tip of the spear, but they can't function if they don't have the support in the back.
And so I think, and you hit the nail on the head with the point that I wanted to make there, is that oftentimes people see investments in things not directly related to our school buildings, and they don't understand why an investment there is justified. But that's the work of all of the folks here, right, is supporting our schools on a daily basis and ensuring that they can be successful in the work that they do. So thank you for that explanation. I just want to make sure that we don't overlook any questions that might come our way in that regard.
Okay.
So I appreciate it.
Madam Chair, I would thank you for emphasizing that, because I think we lose sight, and it's easy to lose sight of the scope of operation that Brevard Public Schools is responsible for. It's very easy to see our little local schools and equate budget and function and operation to, well, just my kid's school and my kid's school's experience. But if we translate that into the scope of the district, 80 miles of coastline property, over 100 facilities to either educate or support the education of our kids, 4,500 teachers, 4,000 plus other employees to support them. And then everything from IEPs have to be moved from one building to another, and student files, and we think about a mailroom. I mean, how much mail could there be in a district? Well, there's a lot, because we have 80,000 individuals who we're trying to manage paper for. We think, well, how much moving could there be in a warehouse? I don't know how to equate it, but tens of thousands of pounds of equipment is moved every year, whether it's student desks from one school to another, because we don't just buy new desks when a school needs 100 desks. We find out in other places across the district, whereas they're surplus, let's get them moved to a district. So, a warehouse needs a forklift, a warehouse needs a truck. And if we don't provide that support, then we have environments that are distracted by things that aren't as good and well equipped as they should be to preserve that learning environment. So, the team is faced with a very unenviable task of, okay, bus breakdowns. That's a very real impact on the learning environment. When a bus breaks down on the way to school, those kids are late to their first period class or the start of the school day. When we can lower the average age of buses, then we increase the reliability and dependency of our fleet. So they've got to balance, okay, do we reduce our buses to increase our FF&E, our classroom equipment and renewal? If you look, we have less than $400,000 for a district with 100 sites for furniture, fixture, and equipment replacement. I got to give kudos to our elementary and secondary leading and learning teams who so judiciously look and analyze how do we maximize everything from desks to bookshelves to teacher stations and so on across our entire district to say, okay, how can we fund the furniture renewal of a media center at this school, because we don't have to fund new cafeteria benches at that school. It literally gets down to that minute detail and consideration. So that's probably far more than you wanted to go with the explanation, but I can't pass on the opportunity to remind our public how hard we work to be responsible, responsive, and considerate of what the needs are across all of our sites. And it is with, you see the $29 or $28 million of requests. We gotta break it down from there, and just how attentive the team is to really maximize and prioritize where we need to spend those dollars. So thank you for emphasizing that.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Mullins. Ms. Hand, we had talked previously about some of our mowing challenges, and I know we've got the robotic mower in here in this funding, which I'm super excited about. But we had talked, and at one point you had funds set aside to purchase or provide mowers to schools who wanted to do that maintenance on their own. Are we continuing that practice in this proposal?
Yes, ma'am, we are. And some of the funds in this proposal are also to replace mowers that we have given to schools that were used mowers. So we're not only replacing our own, but we're replacing those that we've given out to our schools. So yes, we are continuing that.
Awesome. And do we still have schools that are requesting mowers? We still have a lot of people that...
The pace has slowed a bit.
Okay. And then I think my last question is with regard to the matching funds for schools. Mm-hmm. Are we funding that at the same level as we did previously? And are we seeing in that program that we have fairly sufficient funds to meet those needs at our schools, or are we still getting significantly more requests than we can fund?
So we're funding it at the same level. And this year, our fall program did not use all the funds. We have a spring cycle that's underway now, and we have more requests than we have funding, but it's not substantially more. So I feel like if we had another $100,000, we'd probably spend that, but we don't need another $600,000. I think the program funding approximately matches what the schools are able to fundraise. And I think also we have picked up playground replacement in our surtax program, so that's taking that off the table for those schools. And most of the schools that needed marquee signs, we've gotten those done. So those were two of the big, frequency of projects that we had. So I feel like the program is correctly funded at that level.
That's awesome. And are we seeing, we made a change in that program where we were funding our high priority schools, our Title I schools at a higher level. Does that seem to have increased, I'll say, accessibility for those schools with regards to actually achieving projects?
It most definitely did. Prior to that change, we saw very little participation with our priority schools and Title I schools, and now we're seeing either more or equal participation by those schools, so they're certainly taking advantage of the program.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Any other board members have questions, comments?
I just have a follow-up question to something you said, Ms. Belford. Just for clarification purposes for the public and I guess also for myself, but so that millage rate, when we talked about how the housing crisis brought it down from 2.0 to 1.5, we only have so much wiggle room as a board to adjust that, but is this not an option for the voters to propose it being increased as well? What millage is that for?
The 1.5?
I'm sorry. So when we heard about other counties in the past couple of election cycles putting this on their ballots to increase their millage, what millage is that referring to?
Dr. Mullins, do you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. It is up to a 1.0 mils per county for an entity. So Brevard Public Schools could go to the voters for an additional 1 mil of property tax assessment, and it could be used for operating budget expenses. To include, we have the flexibility to take operating and move it for capital expenditures, but we can't move capital funding. Like this LCI funding cannot be moved over to the operating budget. Just like a sales surtax that we currently have, that by statute is limited to capital expenditures. So it is essentially more of a capital assessment ad valorem, but a 1.0 mils would be assessed against property values and would raise revenue that could be used in the operating budget. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, kind of jump off of what Ms. Belford was saying, because that's something that I feel like the public always questions and asks about. They hear about it in the news, and I just wanted to kind of clarify, because there's a little bit of a crossover and there's different buckets. So, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Susan? Dr. Mullins?
Just two things for the board's information. One, again, this is a capital budget proposal. Obviously, we're not here for approval yet. So two things. As I've met with staff, as I'm meeting with staff to tackle the realities of our operating budget for next year, and the board is aware that we're facing a budget deficit going into next year. One of the things I've specifically asked Mr. Cheatham, particularly Mr. Novelli, is to look at, are there potentially operational expenditures that may be able to be transferred to the capital budget that are currently sitting in the operating budget? One of those you heard of that was on the list and not funded because it's unsure that it is eligible, and that was the Microsoft bundling software expense of about $750,000. Mr. Cheatham is going to work with legal, work with finance, and make sure that it isn't eligible to be transferred. If it is determined that it's eligible, or there are other expenditures currently covered in our operating budget that could be transferred to our capital budget, those may come forward to the board for consideration to meet our operating budget deficits. So there may be some additional modifications or edits to this proposed list. We're evaluating whether or not those options or opportunities are available. We have done that previously as an organization. Probably the most recent is the $5 million transfer of property insurance to the capital budget that used to be paid out of the operating budget. And I want to say that was the last time we did that from operating was 2014, 15, I believe. It was, I think, better than 5 years ago. So we have done those things in the past. They are, of course, only transfers that would be allowable, legal, meet all the audit test and all of those things. But I just wanted to put on the board's radar that there may be some modifications to this proposal if those options become available. At the same time, although there isn't the opportunity for a board vote, if I could ask Madam Chair just for board feedback with general consensus of support for this, because there are some projects on here, you know, Ms. Han has alluded to, you know, a couple of them that it would be beneficial to the organization to be able to proceed and start getting some ducks lined up and in a row. And if we could have general board feedback that, yes, we are moving in the right direction with how these are allocated, then we can proceed with those projects and not have to wait until after the September board budget approval meeting to start projects then. So.
Do you want like a thumbs up from each board member, or do you?
That'd be great.
All right, board members. All right,
Got it.
and I'm guessing at some point we will get an update on the ones that are potentially ESSER eligible. So we'll have an idea of how that fleshes out.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Can
awesome.
I ask a question?
Yeah, Ms. McDougall.
I have a question. It may be a ridiculous question, but when we replace school buses, our old buses, is anybody interested in buying those buses? Can we make some money off of this deal?
Yeah, great. I just had that conversation with Mr. Novelli yesterday and my meeting with him. Ms. Lisinski, credit to you, to Ms. Lisinski and Mr. Novelli, they are looking very critically at our bus fleet retention rate. It seems to be very high. Our practice has been a bus is no longer it's no longer a good daily driver, and then so it goes into the substitute pool. When it no longer becomes a viable option to be a substitute, it goes into the surplus pile, and then we use those buses for parts to service our other buses. And what they're finding is as we lower our average bus rate, those older buses are becoming less necessary to be cannibalized because we don't have as many of them. So Mr. Novelli is working with transportation to do a renewed right fit of how many buses we should retain. The other thing they're looking at is the longer we keep them for parts, the less in value they have in the open market. So if we keep a bus until it's rusting off the frame, we might get a couple $100s for it. If we sell it with still some life, we could get thousands of dollars for it, and they exceed the value of the part we pull off of it in 2 years.
Okay.
So they're making that evaluation and anticipate we will be surplusing out many buses that we currently have and take advantage of some potential. So the sale value of the vehicles goes into, I forget, does go into a non-recurring fund source because we do have the surplus warehouse that does sell off old things, and all that revenue is captured and is used as one-time funding for the district.
Great.
So yes, that was a long response to an easy question, but I wanted you to know the diligent work that our people do behind the scenes gets lost in a simple answer. And it's a lot of really serious, considerable effort, and our folks behind the scenes, you know, all their great work gets lost if I don't take advantage of these little moments to say, I'm so impressed with the work that they're doing, and I know the board is as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mullins, for that lengthy explanation. I agree that we have to share those things so people can understand. Sound bites don't do us justice all the time. Anything else from any board members? All right, anything else that you need from us, Dr. Mullins?
No, ma'am, thank you.
All right, super. Hearing no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.